Last year, 1 year ago, you might have seen my video on HIBY R4, a DAP which I declare as a market disruptor for anything under 300 US dollar. It was in fact priced at just over around 250 US dollar. And it was such an amazing device because it has the kind of power, the kind of features, the kind of sound and performance which you would normally expect from digital audio player, which is priced above 500 US dollar. And 1 year from that point onward, not too long after the release of R4, in fact, HIBY have released a very special model, which is called HIBY R4 Evangelion. I have it with me now in my hand. And very recently, HIBY also continue on the succession of R4 with another special collaboration, which is called R4 MiDi. This one, as I understood it, have some sort of collaboration with some rock organization or something like a collective of rock in China. So now let's just talk about what are the differences between all three of them, you might be wondering, because I have spent quite a bit of time comparing all three of them back to back, and so these are the differences, starting with physical itself. As you can see on screen right now, let's just take a moment to digest what we are seeing here. Okay, I am only listing the differences, okay, because physically, when you look at this, even the latest iteration of HIBY R4 MIDI edition, it is pretty much almost identical to the original HIBY R4, and mine was black. In fact, if you were to just have a look at it, aside from the logo here and the case here, it is pretty much like easy to mistake one for another, which is the same thing. But of course, the original R4 would carry color of black, silver, orange, and green, and this one only comes in black. All three of them share the same build, construction and everything externally, except of course for the color. It is impossible to not to notice this exceedingly funky looking Evangelion model here, which comes in purple and green of all the color. I will just openly admit that this is not the kind of color which I like, but I understand this is truthful to the Evangelion color theme. Okay, so internally there are some differences, and most interestingly is that this EVA here obviously will offer larger RAM, which is rated at 4 GB inside the memory itself, and the storage now you get double, which is at around 64 GB. And of course the battery, I have also tried them extensively side by side, and it is quite impressive to say that with the increased price tag at around 70 US dollar, aside from getting more memory, more storage, you also seem to get a bit more of battery endurance. And the most interesting thing is that they all still use 4,500 mAh of battery, but somehow this EVA here managed to score at around 15 hours, which is crazy impressive, because if you have seen my video on the first R4, that R4 of mine was only able to run at around 8 hours, not even 12 hours. But that was with the earlier firmware. With the later firmware, it reached a bit further than that, closer to 10 hours. But my point is that this thing is vastly improved when it comes to battery endurance, the way it managed the power. And of course, this MIDI version here seems to be improved as well, offering in excess of around, give and take, 13 hours. Definitely an improvement over the original HIBY R4. And the reason for that is that has a lot to do with the way it handles power. So let's just have a look at the next one, which is, I think, very important as well. You would notice that the original HIBY R4, which is Class A amplifier, was rated very high at that point of time, at 525 milliwatt of power per channel at 32 ohm. That is a lot of power, okay, from the 4.4 mm balance. And when they released this Evangelion, okay, aside from the, of course, the obvious upgrade, which I mentioned earlier, they also have opted, HIBY have opted to fine-tune the delivery of that power. Same Class A amplifier, same component inside, but the tuning goes on, surprisingly, they actually reduce the milliwatt. Now, instead of 525, it comes only with 500 milliwatt of power. And I can understand why they do that, because by doing so, it makes this HIBY R4 Evangelion a bit more, let's say, suitable for all kind of IEMs and headphone, not just the demanding one. Because I'll be honest with you, when it comes to comparison, when I tried something which is exceedingly stupidly sensitive like hybrid under, let's say, 10 ohm or even 5 ohm, you might find that HIBY R4 tend to be kind of a bit shouty. We are talking about Class A amplifier here, okay? Class A amplifier is raw power delivery. While it will behave exceedingly well with full-size headphone like this or even magnetic planar, it can be shouty when you subject it to usage of highly sensitive IEM, and we do have tons of highly sensitive IEMs hybrid nowadays. And by doing that moderation with power, the result of that is that I am hearing a kind of, let's say, better articulation, better synergy with highly sensitive stuff. In R4, you might need a volume, let's say you need to reduce it as low as perhaps 20 out of 100, but now with this Evangelion, better synergy with highly sensitive IEM. And I am happy to say that HIBY have decided to opt for the same approach when it comes to this MiDi version here, because you would notice this MiDi version will have similar kind of specification to the original HIBY R4, with the exception is that they change the milliwatt of the delivery and also the power delivery of the voltage. And now it runs pretty much similarly milliwatt to this, but also it has lower voltage at 4.0 VRMS to be a bit more versatile with all type of IEM and headphones, anything from the super sensitive to the most demanding one, without losing the topmost power, because by sacrificing that 25 milliwatt of power, it is practically inaudible. I would say that just perhaps on the headroom side, I do need to crank the volume slightly higher when driving hard to drive headphone on this EVA and this MiDi here, by at around, let's say, just 4 steps higher than the original HIBY, because you have to remember that 25 milliwatt of power does impart, you know, the overall volume. Remember I mentioned earlier, Evangelion here is a special edition, and it is pretty much, you know, other than the extreme makeover when it comes to the physical look of it, the UI is definitely totally work. Meaning to say that when I compare it with the original HIBY, which is, by the way, pretty much very similar to this MiDi here, it doesn't change that much. This one is like a totally different device. The interface is like wow, so many things. But at least you're gonna get all three of them, the excellent MSEB, parametric equalizer, you name it, and filters and everything are pretty much identical. But when it comes to the sound delivery, this is the most dynamic sounding among all three of them somehow, because I do feel that when I compare it with the original HIBY R4, with the kind of, let's say, fine tuning which HIBY have done, is that it is a bit more dynamic, yet a bit more, let's say, exhibit some sort of maturity. It is linearly still transparent and neutral, with good amount of texture and definition to the body itself. It does not exhibit that coloration at all from the upper frequency, lower frequency, or even the mid-range, unless, of course, you start to play with the PEQ or even the equalizer. And the main difference when it comes to this MiDi, okay, let me just remind you again what MiDi stands for. Okay, I am not very familiar with MiDi, but when I ask HIBY what is MiDi, MiDi actually basically some sort of a body in China at which they are focusing on rock or metal music. So this will carry some element of that tuning. So I mentioned earlier this thing being linear, being transparent, being dynamically enhanced. This is pretty much a bit more colored when it comes to a certain sound frequency, especially if you listen to rock music. In this case, I have repeatedly used this MiDi here and also Evangelion here, playing this particular song by Loudness, which is Crazy Night, a legendary heavy metal music. And when I listen to it back to back, back and forth, I lost count how many times. Then I realized, okay, that this MiDi will offer a bit more of emphasis on the mid bass and also the upper mid range, because that is exactly where you would want to focus when you listen to rock and metal music. While this Evangelion here seems to offer a bit more of linear kind of sound presentation. It is rich and dense throughout the entire frequency range, but it does not place any kind of coloration when it comes to the mid bass or even the mid-range as how this MIDI would offer. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you want something which is, let's say, a bit more suited for rock and metal music, this is a definite unit to go. But if you listen a lot more to something like electronic music, something which contains a lot of, let's say, sub-bass focus kind of recording, then without a doubt, this would perform better. Because remember I mentioned earlier, this EVA here would sound a bit more dynamic when it comes to the way it handles the transient and everything. It has a bit more of, let's say, emphasis on the way it perceives, or should I say, resolve the lower frequency from the mid-bass to the sub-bass. It does appear to have a bit more of extension and definition when it comes to the lowest frequency. So it sounds a bit more dynamic as compared to the other two HIBY R4. So that's pretty much how I would describe it when it comes to sound and performance for these three different HIBY R4. Thank you so very much for watching the video until the end. Without skipping, I hope. Now click like and subscribe, and also follow me on Instagram under the name of Andy AV. And also, if you'd like to support me directly, you can join the membership below for behind the scene, especially for AAV Insider and above, which will allow you to see what I am doing behind the scene.